In 1791, the Secretary of the Treasury of the newly born United States presented Congress with a document titled Report on Manufactures. His name was Alexander Hamilton. And his proposal was clear: the United States should protect its infant industries with high tariffs to prevent British products, cheaper and of higher quality, from destroying them before they could grow. On the other side of the Atlantic, 15 years earlier, a Scottish philosopher named Adam Smith had published The Wealth of Nations, where he argued exactly the opposite: tariffs are a mistake. They distort markets. They make products more expensive for consumers. The best thing a government can do is let trade flow freely. Smith and Hamilton never met. But their ideas have been clashing for 300 years. And the debate is just as alive today as it was then. Should trade be free? Or do countries need to protect their industries? The answer is far less obvious than either side wants to admit. In the two previous episodes, we saw how trade connected the world, first through ancient routes, then through European maritime expansion. We saw that mercantilism, the doctrine of exporting much and importing little, was the intellectual framework of that expansion. Today we enter the debate that replaced mercantilism and that continues to dominate global economic policy: free trade versus protectionism. We are going to hear the arguments on both sides, without taking sides, because both have powerful reasons and both have serious blind spots. To understand free trade, you first have to understand what it was rebelling against. In 18th century Europe, mercantilism dominated economic policy. Governments imposed tariffs, granted monopolies to favored companies, banned the export of raw materials, and restricted colonial trade. All to accumulate gold and maintain a positive trade balance. Adam Smith saw this system as a trap. In The Wealth of Nations, published in 1776, he argued that mercantilism benefited producers at the expense of consumers. Tariffs made imported products more expensive, forcing the population to buy domestic products that were more expensive or of lower quality. Monopolies eliminated competition and disincentivized innovation. Smith proposed an idea that was radical for his time: if each country specializes in what it produces most efficiently and trades freely with others, everyone benefits. Not because trade is an act of generosity, but out of pure self-interest. The baker does not make you bread out of kindness. He makes it because he wants your money. And you buy it from him because he makes it better and cheaper than you would. The same applies between nations. If Portugal produces wine better and cheaper than England, and England produces cloth better and cheaper than Portugal, both benefit from exchanging wine for cloth instead of trying to produce everything themselves. The logic is convincing. But it has an assumption Smith did not examine deeply enough: what happens to the country that does not yet know how to produce anything efficiently? That was exactly Alexander Hamilton's question. In 1791, the United States was a newly independent agrarian nation. It exported cotton, tobacco, and timber. It imported virtually all manufactured goods from Great Britain: clothing, tools, machinery, glass. Hamilton saw a fundamental problem with the free trade doctrine. If the United States opened its markets completely, British industry, more advanced and with economies of scale, would crush any American manufacturer before it could grow. The United States would be condemned to be a perpetual exporter of raw materials and a perpetual importer of manufactures. His solution: protect infant industries with temporary tariffs. Give them time to grow, learn, improve, and reach a competitive level. And then, once mature, gradually open the markets. This argument, known as infant industry protection, is one of the most enduring in economic history. And it had a powerful intellectual champion in the German economist Friedrich List, who in 1841 published The National System of Political Economy, where he coined a famous metaphor: Great Britain was preaching free trade after having climbed the ladder of protectionism, and now wanted to kick it away so nobody else could climb. The irony is that Hamilton was right about the facts. The United States applied high tariffs throughout the entire 19th century, protecting its textile, steel, and manufacturing industries. And it became the world's greatest industrial power. Great Britain itself had done exactly the same thing before. It protected its textile industry with tariffs and import bans for decades before becoming the champion of free trade. The most emblematic moment in this debate occurred in Great Britain in 1846, the repeal of the Corn Laws. Since 1815, the Corn Laws had imposed tariffs on imported grain to protect British landowners. This kept the price of bread high, which benefited wealthy farmers but hurt urban workers and industrialists, who had to pay higher wages so their workers could afford to eat. The Anti-Corn Law League, led by industrialists Richard Cobden and John Bright, campaigned for years for abolition. Their argument was directly Smithian: free trade in grain would lower the price of bread, benefiting millions of workers. The final catalyst was the Irish famine of 1845. While 1 million Irish people were starving, tariffs on imported grain remained in force. The moral pressure became unsustainable. Prime Minister Robert Peel, a conservative representing the landowning class, defied his own party and repealed the Corn Laws in 1846. It cost him his job. The repeal was a decisive moment. Great Britain embraced free trade unilaterally, without demanding reciprocity. And in the following decades, the British economy grew enormously. But there is a detail that free trade advocates often omit. Great Britain adopted free trade in 1846, when it was already, by far, the most advanced industrial power in the world. It did not adopt free trade in order to industrialize. It industrialized first, behind protectionist barriers, and adopted free trade afterward, when it was convenient. In 2002, South Korean economist Ha-Joon Chang, a professor at Cambridge, published a book that blew the debate wide open. It was titled Kicking Away the Ladder. Chang's thesis was incendiary but well documented. Virtually every country that is developed today used protectionism, industrial subsidies, technology theft, and patent violations to develop. The United States, Great Britain, Germany, Japan, South Korea. All of them. And yet, those same countries were now demanding that developing nations adopt free trade, deregulation, and intellectual property protection as conditions for receiving aid or accessing their markets. Chang compared it to someone climbing a ladder and then pulling it up so nobody else could follow. This does not necessarily mean protectionism is always good. History is also full of infant industries that never grew up, protected indefinitely by tariffs that only enriched inefficient businessmen at the consumer's expense. Latin America had decades of import substitution with very mixed results. Protection without a plan for maturation can become a permanent subsidy for inefficiency. The debate, ultimately, is not as simple as free trade yes or no. The real question is, free trade, when, for whom, and under what conditions? This debate may seem abstract, but it has direct consequences for millions of people's lives. When a government lowers tariffs, consumers benefit, imported products are cheaper. But workers in industries that cannot compete with those imports lose their jobs. A factory that closes is not a statistic. It is a town that empties, families that break apart, communities that lose their identity. When a government raises tariffs to protect an industry, the workers in that industry keep their jobs. But all consumers pay higher prices. And protected industries, without competitive pressure, can become complacent and obsolete. There is no solution that has no losers. Intellectual honesty requires acknowledging this. Free trade advocates sometimes minimize the suffering of those who lose their jobs. Protectionism advocates sometimes ignore the fact that tariffs are, in essence, a tax paid by the poorest consumers. The debate is not between a good option and a bad one. It is between two imperfect options, each with its own winners and losers. 3 ideas to take away from this episode. First, the debate between free trade and protectionism has been going on for more than 300 years and has no simple answer. Adam Smith argued that free trade benefits everyone. Alexander Hamilton responded that developing countries need to protect their infant industries. Second, history suggests that most of today's developed countries used protectionism to industrialize and then championed free trade once they were competitive. Great Britain, the United States, Germany, Japan, and South Korea all followed that pattern. Third, neither free trade nor protectionism are universal solutions. Both have real benefits and real costs. The question is not which is better in the abstract, but which is more appropriate for each country at each stage of its development. Theory says that free trade makes everyone better off in the long run. But the long run can be very long. And some people never reach the happy ending the textbooks promise. In the next episode we will see what happens when comparative advantage meets the real world, who wins, who loses, and why theories do not always match experience. That, next time.